I traveled to Seoul for a week by myself back in 2018. I was studying at that time, and I was doing a semester abroad in Kyoto. Seoul is expensive, so I decided to book a room in a hostel. It was supposed to be a mixed dorm for 6 people. Upon arrival, I found out that I was actually going to be sharing a room with 5 other men who were already staying at the hostel. At that point, I was still quite naive and didn't think much of it. Besides, the hostel was already fully booked. There was 1 guy from Japan, 1 from Korea, 2 from China, and 1 from Germany in my room. The German guy gave me weird vibes from the beginning, especially by the way he just stared at me, but I brushed it off because I was going to be out all day anyways. Every day, he'd ask if I wanted to hang out and go see the sights together, which I would have rather done on my own, so I just came up with an excuse. One time, I accepted his invitation to explore Gangnam, and it was just awkward. We had very little to speak about besides small talk. In the mornings, when I would do my makeup and my hair, he would just stand there and watch, saying nothing. I got annoyed and asked him if there was somewhere else he had to be numerous times. He'd just shrug after. Anyway, for the entire week, I was weirded out but did my best to avoid him. One time, we ran into each other at a cafe in the city center, which I found strange because what are the odds? The other guys in my dorm were all super nice. We even all went out for dinner one night. Then, on my very last day, I woke up too early and drifted back to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was to him sitting by my bedside and caressing my arm and shoulder. I immediately sat straight up and asked him what he was doing. Even though it was only my arm he was touching, I still felt so disgusted. I always thought of myself as someone who would scream and curse at a situation like this, but I was simply dazed and shocked. He then went on to confess his love for me. He then said he wanted to meet up when we were back at home, as I'm from Germany too, and how I was just so special. When I pointed out he couldn't possibly be in love with me because it had only been a week, he insisted that he just knew and that he wanted to show me his affection. At that point, I was so nauseous. Of course he was leaving that morning too, and offered to go to the airport together. I insisted on taking a later bus, and he thankfully left it at that. I couldn't wait for him to just go and leave me alone. I'm glad I didn't run into him at the airport, but at some point, I just burst into tears. I'd been so exhausted trying to ward off his advances all week, and then gently tell him that I wasn't interested after he touched me while I was sleeping. I don't even know how I managed to remain so calm and polite to him, but who knows how he would have acted if I'd been aggressive. In hindsight, I think I should have just insisted on switching rooms, but up until that very last morning, nothing actually happened, and I would tell myself that maybe that poor guy was just awkward and didn't mean it. I go to the gym rather late. I'm a parent and a college student, so late-night gym sessions work better for me. I once got out of the gym around 12 a.m. I stopped at the gas station to put some air in my tires, and I noticed a man kind of eyeing me from afar. He then came up to me, offering to finish it for me. I politely declined. He then went on, saying I have a good figure, and I was really pretty. I thanked him, and then tried to go on about my business. He keeps talking, mentions how I remind him of his girlfriend who died a couple of years ago, and how he's trying to get it all together. There was a red car parked next to me, and it was full of stuff in the back. It was like someone lived in it. He said it was his, and he was renting a little room for his business, but once the landlord found out that he was living in it and not doing business, he got kicked out. He said it was full of books and that he loved to read. He said he doesn't have anywhere else to go, and he can't go anywhere because he doesn't have plates on his car. He asked if I would follow him back to the office so the police would avoid reading his plates, since around this time there was a bunch of them. I already knew this was a red flag, but I was raised as a people pleaser and couldn't say no. After I said yes, I knew I made a mistake. I tried to turn back, but he said it's fine. It's just down the street and it'll be quick. I followed him and get to the office. It's in a dark alley, and no one was around. There were no streetlights either. He tried to keep talking to me when he got out of his car, and I kept my windows rolled up with a small crack, just enough for me and him to hear each other, but not so much that he could reach inside. I kept my doors locked. He opened the door to his office and tried to convince me that there wasn't anyone else there and that it's safe. But all I saw from my car was one exit to a small room, and he was standing right in front of it. I did see books, but it was not enough to convince me. He said he would bring them outside, but they were too heavy. I of course declined and said no, I'm not going in there. He kept trying to talk me into it, saying he's not going to do anything to me, and that he just wants to show me his books and his office. I declined again and again, and I said I would be leaving. He stopped, and he was quiet for a bit. Then he just said, "You're smart." After that, I sped off and never saw him again. This was several years ago. I've never really spoken about it, and I figured it belonged here. I was about 18 or 19, and definitely looked younger. I was working as a barista at the time, at a place near the hotspot for the homeless population. Don't get me wrong, I loved them all dearly, but it made for some interesting interactions at times. One shift, I take the order of a very interesting-looking man. I dress goth, and personally, I'm not one to judge style. But he had quite a lot of scarification done to him, and all over his hands. Honestly, I probably would have thought it was cool on anyone else, but he in particular gave me the creeps. He ordered the cheapest thing he could, and when I asked him for his name, he says, let's go with John. I ignored his banter, put down his supposed name, and he drops me a $5 tip and sits down. I knew he was watching me, but I didn't look over at him. When his order was ready, I called out John. He comes to grab it and proceeds to show me some rainbow chrome skull thing he had. Very cool, John. He continued to stay for 2 hours, ordering an occasional coffee and tipping me. I'm not sure when or where he managed to get it, but he ended up bringing me a flower in a plastic dinosaur-shaped vase. It was kind of cute, but I was terrified. At that point, I let my manager know, and he kicked the guy out. Now, the very same night, I make it back home from my shift and go about my day. Then I heard a loud popping outside in my neighborhood, and that freaked me out a little. A while later, something told me to check the news on my phone. I figured if something did happen, I would find it. Nope, just a photo of John, and an article announcing his long-awaited arrest for kidnapping and arson. There was very little information about the kidnapping, but as for the arson, he set a retirement home on fire. The photo was undeniably him, but anyway, I am glad I made it out. I was out with my dog, following the same route at the same time as usual. At one point, we passed through the darkest part of the path, where there's an alley to the left with no lights. Suddenly, my dog started barking like crazy, clearly alarmed. I had my headphones on, but knew something was off. When I looked towards the alley, I didn't see anything at first, but then, as my eyes adjusted, I noticed a very tall and skinny man standing there. He didn't move. He just stood facing me and staring. Or at least it seemed that way. He was dressed in all black, which was strange since it was 90 to 100 degrees all week, and it was 10:30 at night. I kind of just froze for a moment, and then said, pretty loudly as I turned my headphones off to listen. The man still said nothing, and as I started to turn toward him, I continued walking forward. After a moment of silence, with me trying to walk away and chalk it up as a creepy but harmless encounter, he started to follow me. He followed me for about 2 to 3 minutes, not saying a word, just staring. When I finally felt like I could speak, I shouted, telling him that my dog's gonna bite him. That seemed to scare him a bit, but he continued following me for another 30 seconds or so, before slowly turning off the sidewalk and walked in a completely different direction. When he turned, I noticed he had a huge backpack, and it looked extremely full. I have a really uneasy feeling about this. I walk this path almost every night, and it seems odd that this man was just standing there in the darkest alley.